Hi folks, this is John Kurikawa, and I'm super excited to share two brand new concert etudes from the renowned composer Reena Esmail. Reena is one of today's leading composers. Her chamber and orchestral works are performed by world-class artists and ensembles around the globe, including the Los Angeles Master Chorale, Seattle Symphony, Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and the Kronos Quartet. Her music has been featured on multiple Grammy-nominated albums, and we as clarinetists are lucky to have her writing for our instrument. I mean, how amazing is that? This video features a performance of both etudes. The first is slow and lyrical, the second is fast and energetic. And, as a special bonus, stick around after the performance for an interview with Reena, where we talk about the genesis of these etudes and her creative process as a composer. Please remember to like and subscribe. More videos are on the way. And don't forget to check out Reena's website and follow her on Instagram. I love these etudes, I love Reena's music, and I can't wait to share them with you. Enough talking. On with the video. thank you for watching this part of the video. I'm super excited to have Grammy-nominated composer Reena Esmail on the channel. So I just thought we would talk a little bit about these etudes and your inspiration from them, and a little bit about you as a composer. So
Yeah.
first thing is, can you give us a little bit about your background and about yourself and how you came to be a professional composer?
Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of backed my way into professional composition. When I was in high school, I really wanted to be a pianist. And so I was one of those kids who practiced like every day, multiple hours a day. I didn't have like an amount that I should practice. I had a practice curfew where my father would kick me off the piano at a certain time every night. So I was 100% that kid. But the thing is, I loved playing for myself and I loved actually getting into the music, but I realized at that point I wasn't someone who loved being on stage.
Hmm.
Again, so I realized at a certain point I went to the arts high school and they said like, hey, you might be a composer. Why don't you try to kind of write some music? And so they put me in this Friday composition elective, and one thing led to another, and I wrote some pieces. And when I went to apply to schools, people were like calling me back some places for piano, but I got in everywhere for composition. And
Wow.
so then I just thought, okay, maybe this is what I should do. Like I just thought it was this fun side thing I was doing. I didn't know it
Mhm.
was a job you could have. So yeah, being a composer was very different when I was growing up. It wasn't like there were so many composers who had this high profile. It was just a really different situation. So I just didn't realize you could do it until I started doing it, basically. So yeah, that was my journey.
Wow. Well, I can say as a teacher, having a student that has to actually be cut off from practicing, that is every teacher's dream. So that's
Right,
pretty,
right.
that's pretty wonderful. Um, so you have a really unique composition style that combines Indian classical music and Western classical music. So I was wondering if we could talk about that a little bit. And for people who aren't familiar, like how would you describe like Hindustani music, which I believe is your background? How would you describe it, and how is it in a nutshell, and how is it different from Western classical music?
That's such a great question. So basically, Hindustani, and there's also Carnatic, which is South
Mhm.
Indian music. Both they're two classical music traditions within India. So these aren't folk traditions; they're classical music, just like Western classical music, which means that people study for long periods of time with like one teacher, and just continue to get into a more subtle and subtle version of what they do.
Mhm.
The difference is for Western music. I think about 1,000 plus years ago, we broke off into having more and more specific notation. But a
Mhm.
lot of other musical cultures stayed in this kind of improvisatory tradition. And Indian classical music is really one of them, especially Hindustani. And so you have these things that are possible because you're improvising and because it's not written down that aren't, they're very different than what happens when you can write music down. So for our style, we can do these crazy things like have 100 people play together and all play the same notes at the same time so that we get harmony and we get counterpoint. All of those things are possible because of notation.
Mhm.
But with Indian music, what's possible is sometimes you can get these really subtle melodies. Like, actually, even if you've ever listen to pop singers where they're improvising and they're doing these crazy things. If you were to write that down, it would be very hard to write down. But if you're just hearing it and kind of repeating it, it will allow you to do these really subtle things. So a lot of times you find a Hindustani melody is much more um, kind of complex than Western melody is. And you'll
Mhm.
also find that the rhythmic cycles are much more complex and have more information in them. So when a Hindustani musician is learning, they're going to learn through call and response. And so a teacher will just sing a phrase or play a phrase and they'll sing or play it back. And there's not a lot of discussion about mechanics or anything. It's just that you start to understand what to do. And then you start to understand the possibilities within that scale or that raga, that Indian raga. And we'll get into that in a bit. But
Mhm.
those are the kind of main differences. So I would think of Western music as being able to privilege this vertical connection that isn't
Mhm.
always possible in Hindustani music. Hindustani music doesn't have harmony and stuff like that. And Hindustani music is able to privilege kind of a more horizontal melody and rhythm that Western music often doesn't have the ability to do at such a subtle, fine grade level.
Mhm. Wow, that's really interesting. And I can say from my limited exposure, the other besides the really beautiful singing melodies, is this that the Hindustani music, it can have a real groove to it.
Yes.
I can say from personal experience performing some of your music, you can look out in the audience if you're not looking at the music and just see people nodding along. And
Yeah.
that was, you know, personally one of the things I noticed when I took one semester of Indian music appreciation is that there's audience participation in some forms of Indian classical music. There's ways to keep time. And I just think that's so cool. So
It is.
it's such a different tradition. What gave you the inspiration to kind of combine these two very different genres? Because you've created this very unique space where these two
Yeah.
traditions and I think you do it better than anybody else.
Oh, thank
You
you.
know, and well, it's true. You know, I mean, I think for somebody like me who has no formal training, you know, it's really great to kind of dive in and find these beautiful soaring melodic lines. It's opened up like
Yeah.
a whole new world for so many musicians who delve into your music. So, what kind of
Oh,
gave you the inspiration to put these two worlds together?
yeah, I think for me, it's just actually my own personal experience. And I think, I mean, this is true for all of us who are musicians. You know, there's the mechanics of what we do, and then there's the kind of reason why we continue to come to it every day. Because as we know, being a musician is tough, right? And
Yes.
so, in order to want to continue to be a professional musician, you just have to have this reason inside you that is not tied to anything except just what you personally want. And for me, that was that I grew up being a Western classical musician. So basically, straight until I was in my mid 20s, I studied only Western classical music because, you know, that was what was around me. And my parents saw I was musical and they put me in, uh, piano lessons and violin and guitar. And then, I got through college. I'd done my undergrad and I just kind of thought to myself, I know I am Indian and I know that
Mhm.
India has a deep musical tradition.
Mhm.
And I also know that I really don't only want to do music with people who don't share my culture. I know that there are people out there who are musicians who are Indian. Like, how can I find these people? And so I was living in New York City and I said, there have to be Indian musicians here. Let me try to find people. And slowly but surely, I started meeting classical musicians who did classical music who were Indian, but they just weren't doing Western classical music. They were doing Indian classical music.
Mhm.
And so then, because I liked these musicians as humans, and I would say, okay, I want to try to work with you. Like, how do we work together? How do we build something together? And so I learned not necessarily from a book or because of the music itself. I learned because the people I loved kind of led me to love the music. And so it wasn't until I was in my mid 20s that I actually went to India and really like studied myself. So it's been probably about 15 years that I've been working in this mutual space. But I
Wow.
think like anything, sometimes you see two people and you're like, I want these people to meet one another. And
Hmm.
just imagine, like, if these people don't speak the same language or they don't, but you're like, I know they would just love each other if they
Yes.
just had a chance to meet one another. And so that I think is my inspiration, where I see people from these two different traditions where I think, oh my gosh, they would just love to know one another. Let me build a
Mhm.
piece that makes that possible. So I started from there. And then, with the music that you play that doesn't necessarily have a Hindustani musician in it, I think to myself, wow, I know a Western musician would love to play this melody, but I know they're not going to play it unless there's a way for them to get into it. And so a lot of my music that's only for Western musicians has been about making Hindustani music feel like at least one instance of it is accessible. Like maybe they're not able to just freely improvise, but maybe if I kind of try to freeze one version of it and give them a chance to really get into it the way that they know and the way that their training supports, it really helps to have that access point. And then, maybe like you, there are people who will want to actually really study the art form. But I feel like there should be an entry point that feels so warm and so inviting so that if people do want to go further, they always can.
Mhm. Wow, that's really fantastic. And yeah, and it is warm and inviting. I think that's the really rewarding thing about diving into into a lot of this music is that, you know, some of it's really hard and it takes a lot of work, but the reward you get from delving into it and, you know, the rewards are just so rich. You know, that's one of
For
the things that I
sure.
love. Can we circle back to the ragas? You said we were going to
Yeah,
touch on that later. What is a raga? And how
that's a great question.
huh?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a raga is the most similar thing you could relate it to in Western classical music is a scale.
Mhm.
So, we have major and minor scales, we have modes, but a raga kind of starts there as a collection of pitches with certain tendencies, the same way we would have like, oh, seven goes to one, maybe four goes down to three and a major scale. So raga has all of that. But then it has a lot of other information in it. So it will have things like specific phrases like, okay, there's a certain way that you would navigate through these couple of notes or these couple of notes. And I would think of it almost, we have one vestige of that still in Western classical music,
Mhm.
which is the top of the minor scale. So you think about how there's this kind of relationship between six and seven and one, and we tell ourselves that there are these three different scales, but in actual fact our ear just kind of knows how to navigate the top of that scale. And so if you take that and you put it in different places in within ragas, you'll get this whole world of how Hindustani classical melody operates. And then in addition to that, it also has other things like there are times of day that are associated with each raga that you would perform
Mhm.
it within this certain kind of 3 hour period. And not that, of course, now we're at this point where people perform all different ragas at all times of day, but they do have that association in Indian classical music. And they
Wow.
also have sometimes an association with season or an association with certain kind of emotional aesthetic uh, elements as well. And I think it's because, in Western classical music, yeah, we have say the minor scale, but then we also have in there composers who are saying, okay, I'm using the minor scale in this piece to kind of convey X,
Mhm.
like how Schubert will use minor versus how, Beethoven will use minor might be different and even more different with, composers that are further back and forward in time. And so in Indian classical music, because it's just the relationship between the raga and it goes straight to the performer who improvises, I think there does need to be a lot more aesthetic information for them to play with.
Mhm. Really interesting. And I've been very lucky in my career to be able to perform with some really prominent Indian musicians. And all I have to say is y'all must have monster ears because my goodness, some of the improvisations get so intricate and complex. I
They
just think
really
that's
do. Yeah. And it's sometimes it's like easy to follow. And sometimes you're like, I don't know where they are. And then suddenly they'll
mhm,
kind of come in and, ground themselves. But you think, wow, there's a whole level that they're perceiving that maybe I can't even.
mhm. That's amazing. So can we circle around to these etudes? So
Yes.
what was your inspiration for them? And um, I happened to just take a peek at your website. You have quite a few pieces that involve the clarinet. Is there something that draws you to the instrument? And well, I'm getting into multiple questions. So
Yeah.
let's just circle back
Yeah.
to focus on
Yeah.
the etudes. What was the inspiration for these?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I love to work at all levels in my music, right?
Mhm.
Because if you think about people who are, the famous composers that we revere, Bach, Mozart, Schumann, people like that, they have these pieces that were, professional level pieces that symphonies play and all that. And then they also have music for children, right? They also have
Yes.
music that's pedagogical music. And so what it is, it's even Bartok has the Mikrokosmos. And what it is that they want to of course, probably a lot of them were teachers and that they were teaching this music, but then also I think it's really important on a musical level that if you are someone who's trying to develop a style, you can't expect that someone is just going to study classical music and then is going to be 25 and graduate with a master's degree and that's the first time they're encountering your music. I
Mhm.
mean, I feel like that shouldn't be the case.
Right.
And so the further I've gotten on the professional side because I have like the clarinet concerto is something that is really a tough piece to play,
Mhm.
but then I thought what is a way to introduce my style to younger clarinetists, to people who are just starting out who just want a little taste of like, okay, what does this person's music feel like in my instrument? And
Mhm.
so Josh Anderson, who's a clarinetist based in Reno, Nevada, he and I went to school together at Yale, and he was putting together this series called New 32, where it's the Rose Etudes, but he's commissioned two from each composer. And he was like, hey, would you be interested in writing a set of clarinet, like solo unaccompanied clarinet etudes? And I thought, yes, because of course, for the reason that I just said, like I really want people who are not going to be in a position to go from 0 to 90 with my clarinet music to
Mhm.
just have a starting and access point to my style.
Mhm.
But then also, to have an access point to Indian classical music as well, right? If you're a clarinetist, maybe you just want to just test it out and see if it's something you like.
Hmm.
And so that was really my inspiration to try to bring it as essential as possible to give people a chance to explore those elements.
Wow, that's fantastic. Um, can I ask you another question? Because you're obviously a brilliant musician, but how do you write for an instrument that you don't, I'm assuming you don't play the clarinet.
I
How
don't.
how do you as a composer write for an instrument that you don't play? Because I mean, yes, the clarinet concerto is hard, and these etudes are challenging, but they're very approachable. They actually lay quite well while, providing just the right amount of challenge. How'd you do that if you don't play the instrument? And how do you, as a composer, approach that? Because obviously, you write big orchestral works
Right.
with loaded with color and just, and beautiful parts for every instrument. How do you do that as a composer?
That's such a great question. And I think it's, you start out on one side when you're a young composer,
Hmm.
take orchestration and you'll learn just the basic things that will help you. This is the range, this is how it sounds in various ranges. And those are things that like even undergrad composers will learn.
Hmm.
But I think that's only like 10% of what you really need to know to write well for an instrument. And
Hmm.
not to say I'm at 100%, I would put myself maybe at like 60 or something. I still have a long way to go in terms of what I think I can do to explore the instrument. There's like
Hmm.
so much more I can do.
Hmm.
But then I think the when you start getting beyond those basics of what's right and wrong,
Hmm.
I what I will do is I will rely on musicians, right? Because
Hmm.
I think, okay, I know what I think the clarinet sounds like in my mind, and I'm going to try to write whatever I think I want the clarinet to sound like. Because if I write too conservative, like if I'm trying to follow rules, then the music just gets really boring. You have to
Hmm.
take risks that are a little bit wild in order to actually write interesting music. But then you need someone to kind of pull you back. And so it was interesting because, you and I have worked together in various ways where I'll send you things and say, hey, is this working or is this not working?
Hmm.
What's your opinion on this? And I'll actually let you guide me and make changes based on what I hear you playing. And a lot of times you're playing things that maybe you're seeing what's on the page for the first time and you're taking it in a certain way, and maybe it's all playable, but then I'm like, oh, I wonder if he can do this. I wonder if he can
Hmm.
do that. And so then we kind of find this balance that feels like it's something
Hmm.
that's new, but something that, oh, if you just made this one change, it would prevent me from having to go over the break in this weird way or something like that.
Hmm.
So I do think and I think with all music, we actually underestimate how much we need each other, how much composers and
Hmm.
performers need one another. Because if I have a performer I'm working with, I can get them to do the craziest stuff that might be so hard to notate, but is totally fine on the instrument. And then
Hmm.
we can build it into a piece together. Otherwise, if I'm only beholden to what I know works, I have very little to work with.
Hmm. Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I can say, I really enjoyed working on these etudes because they do um, pose not problems, but challenges to the clarinetist that we all need to work on. We all need to learn how to play softly in the high register. We all need to develop the flexibility to be able to play to bend pitch. We need to be able to play a beautiful legato, no matter what the melody
Yeah,
is.
right, right.
And I think that's why these are so useful. And the fact that they're actually written for the clarinet is great because I mean we
Yeah,
talked about this. Most people don't know that the Rose etudes were not written for the clarinet. They were ripped
right.
off from violin and oboe etudes. And so to actually have teaching materials that are written for our instrument is such a great gift. It is such a great gift. And the other thing that I love about them too is that they're not just pieces designed to torture you, right? They're really beautiful pieces of music that you could easily program on a recital as a pair. And I think they could
Right.
actually go over really, really, really well. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about these etudes. I think they're really, really, really wonderful in that way.
I'm so glad because one of the things that I think is interesting for me as a composer is I'm also trying to synthesize my style for clarinet writing, right? And it
Hmm.
gives me a chance to say, okay, what is it that I really care about that I want the clarinet to do? Like you're right, some of that pitch bending stuff, I do feel like if I'm gonna ask someone to stretch themselves a little bit, I have to think what way do I want them to stretch themselves?
Hmm.
And certainly pitch bending is one of those ways. And so I'm working with what do I have to pull back on so that I'm not distracting someone from the specific challenge of this etude. And
Hmm.
that's part of the fun of writing pieces like this.
Okay, that's really, really great. Yeah, I love them, and I can't wait for more clarinet players to discover them. Are there any other pieces you'd like us to be aware of that you've written for the clarinet that you
Yeah.
think people would like? I've played your clarinet concerto with orchestra, but I've also played my sister's voice in two orchestras now, which was just such a rewarding
Oh,
experience. Oh my goodness, what an amazing piece that is. But are there any other
oh.
pieces in your repertoire that you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you're right. I do write a lot for clarinet in orchestra, and it's just an instrument that is so flexible. It can do so much and also can blend with like anything. And so
Right.
I
Yeah.
feel like there's just this element where if you want a little bit of extra richness, or if you want like a melody to suddenly come out of nowhere, like the clarinet is so good at doing that. So a lot of my orchestra work, I would say that though if you're playing my orchestra work, it's probably not that you decided to play it. You happen to be in an orchestra that's playing it.
Mhm.
For pieces that maybe you do have a little bit more control over what you play. So I do have this interesting piece for clarinet, violoncello, and piano.
Mm.
And it's called Tasvir. And that's an interesting piece because it's one of my very earliest pieces where I was starting to try to put together Hindustani and Western music. I had literally just come back from India. It was a year that I had never written any music in that year. I just stopped composing and I just like immersed myself in Indian classical music. So it was the first piece of Western music I had composed after coming back. So that's one where, if you're curious, that's a really interesting one. The other one is a piece for choir with a clarinet obbligato.
Oh.
So this is a piece called Even After All This Time, and it's a setting of the poet Hafiz. And is saying, even all after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look at what happens with a love like that; it lights the whole sky.
Mhm.
That's the text.
Mhm.
And the clarinet is at different times kind of providing texture, and sometimes it's having these like beautiful long runs. So it does feel like a virtuosic clarinet solo that goes along with this choir piece. So that's the other one. And then there's a really deep cut that's not on my website, that's not that I kind of don't put out there, but I'll say this here because I know there's probably a lot of young people who are watching this. Um, when the very first piece that I ever wrote that was played by a professional musician was a clarinet piece. So
Huh.
I have this little clarinet piece called Desire. And I wrote it because, I was saying before that I didn't really know that I wanted to be a composer until I started auditioning for college. And so I only had two pieces that I had ever written, and I sent them out to colleges. And as they started to invite me back for auditions, they would say, "Oh, we want another piece. We want you to just to send us more music." And I didn't have this music, so I would have to just write it. So for my Eastman audition, and I didn't get into Eastman, but for that audition, I I wrote this little clarinet piece called Desire. It's a clarinet and piano, and it was Helen Good Castro, a clarinetist who lives in Los Angeles, and then
Mhm.
me at the piano. We gave the premiere of this piece. So it's one that I don't really let out of the gate a lot because it's not in my current style and it's not a professional work. But if you're a young clarinetist and you want to just see what I wrote when I was 17, especially if
Mhm.
you're in your teens and you want to play, please just contact us and, we'll send it to you.
Okay. That is a wonderful segue actually to where can we find you on the internet
Yes, that's
and
perfect. So
listen to you and purchase your music.
yes, absolutely. So my website is just reenaesmail.com. You can
Mhm.
go there and there you'll see under catalog, it has a list of all my pieces. And there is a section that's just for clarinet. So go there and explore whatever you want. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I have a pretty active Instagram, just, at Reena Esmail. Those are probably the two best places to find me. I'm kind of on Facebook, but I'm never on it. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But certainly go to my website. And actually, there's a lot of really incredible recordings of my music on YouTube as well
Mm.
that are not on my website. So if you want to just explore my music, there's people, everyone from, amazing professionals like you playing my music
Oh.
all the way to students who are just kind of starting out. And it's really cool to see what people are doing.
Mhm. Wonderful. Well, Reena, thank you so much for the conversation. Really wonderful to get to chat with you and find out more about these exciting etudes. And I can't wait to see what you're going to turn out in the future.
Oh,
In fact, I have to ask, do you have any exciting projects coming up? Because it seems like every time I look at you on Instagram, you're jetting off to somewhere exciting to hear a premiere of a new work. Do you have any new projects in the pipeline you want
yes.
to tell us about?
Yes, actually, I'm so glad you mentioned this because I actually do have a new commission for clarinet and piano coming up. So International Clarinet Association
Yes,
commissioned a
we
piece
saw that.
in the next couple of years. Yeah, and so that is a consortium. So anyone who wants to join the consortium and be part of it, like that's please, feel free to do that, and we'll get you the information. But that's a new piece for clarinet. But right now I'm working on an insane harp concerto that is somewhere
Oh.
between a harp concerto and like a one woman show. It's going to be wild. So there's a lot always going on. I work as you know, I work between the worlds of chamber music, orchestra music, choral music, and now band music is
Mhm.
a new thing. So it's there's always something happening.
That's amazing. Well, we'll have your website and Instagram account linked in the description below so people can come find you. But thank you so much for the conversation. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And thank you for all your wonderful music because, like I said, if you haven't played it, the rewards from diving into it and working it out, the rewards are so rich. And they've made, they make my heart sing and I love it all so much. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you for chatting
Thank you,
today.
John.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Reena Esmail. Not only is she one of the best living composers today, she's one of the most inspiring musicians I know. Please make sure to check out her website where you can get these exciting etudes and more amazing music and follow her on Instagram. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe. I am so grateful to all of you who watch my videos, and especially those of you that I got to meet at Clarinet Fest this past week. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in the comments to see what you thought about these exciting new etudes, and I hope you enjoyed listening to them as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.